Merry Christmas tide to everyone who is watching this video. It's New Year's Eve actually right now, but we as Catholics actually celebrate Christmas in a season. Traditionally, before the 1962, I believe, liturgical reform in Vatican II, the Christmas season, liturgical season, would go on until February 2nd, Candlemas. But now the Christmas season kind of just ends on New Year's Day, which is the 12 days of Christmas. There's also the Christmas octave, which is the 8 days after Christmas. And then there's the 12 days of Christmas, or 12-tide. And but now, since the Novus Ordo has been a thing, now there's kind of like a weird chunk of ordinary time between the end of Epiphany, the Feast of Epiphany, going up until Lent. So it's perfectly acceptable to talk about Christmas, do a Christmas video after that, but I'm going to be talking about Christmas lore. So I did a ton of research like last year, and I realized that I liked making content because I was like researching all the traditions of Christmas, like what is the origins of mistletoe? Why do people kiss under mistletoe? Christmas ham, and I wrote all these little Facebook posts about last year about this kind of stuff, and I still have them, so I kind of saved them. So this video is going to be about Christmas lore and a lot of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be talking about Yule, the Yule log, the holly versus oak king battle, Christmas ham and the origin of New Year's resolutions, mistletoe, Christmas elves, the Yule goat traditions, a Yule booking a little bit. I'll be talking about Krampus, and I'll be talking about the origin of the Christmas tree, and I'll be talking about the origin of Santa Claus. So that's what's coming forward. This probably will be the biggest video I've ever made, and there's a lot there. So I guess we'll start with the Christmas octave. So, it starts with the Vigil Mass on Christmas Eve and extends until New Year's Day. And there is this tradition, in the Jewish tradition, you can't fully process and celebrate something in just a single day of feasting. That's why in 8 days is a full measure of celebration. So that's where the octave came from. There used to be way more octaves before the Second Vatican Council. There used to be like a ton of them, but now there's only the Christmas octave and the Easter octave, which is the 8 days after Christmas and Easter respectively. There used to be a Pentecost octave as well. But you can't truly feast if you don't fast. So if you're not kind of doing penance and fasting a little bit during Advent, the meaning and significance of the octave is kind of messed up, and that's kind of what's messed up about modern society, is that there's only the feasting and there's no fasting, there's no penance. Like, we have Easter still, people celebrate Easter and Christmas, but they don't have any kind of spiritual preparation season. So the ethos of the Christmas octave is it's a joyful time, and you might be wondering, the first couple days of the Christmas octave are actually feasts of martyrs. Like the Holy Innocents is in there, Saint John the Apostle is in there, who was a white martyr. And it's like, you might be asking, why is it that the martyrs are in this joyful time? And it's because it says more about martyrdom, that martyrdom has kind of joyful undertones, that you are finally entering into the kingdom of heaven, that you have ran your race. So that is why there's martyrs in the first couple days of the Christmas octave. And yeah, the feast of Christmas is really, it's a season. It's not just a single day, and that's something that needs to be brought back. I've been thinking about, like, how can I kind of celebrate the Christmas octave, because you can only eat like a bunch of decadent food for so much before you're feeling like crap. So there has to be kind of like maybe a more spiritual disposition aspect to it as well. It's a car. But anyways, so one thing that's important to understand regarding a lot of the European Christmas traditions is Yule. So Yule was the pagan kind of Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic holiday that preceded before the Christians came. And what happened was, the Christians, when they came into these pagan lands and they were converting all the Germanic peoples, they repurposed a lot of these traditions and reoriented them towards Christ. And a lot of Protestants have a lot of issues with this, but think about this. Moses, when he's traveling through the desert with the Israelites, he has his snake staff, and he has the symbol of a snake, and he strikes the rock, and water comes out of the rock. If the symbol of the snake is associated with Satan, then why does Moses have a snake staff? Its symbols are not exactly fixed. They can be reoriented towards different things. Symbols can mean different things, and that's what happened with many of the pagan traditions and symbols, is that this symbol exists, but then it was reoriented into a Christian worldview. So during Yule, it was believed that magic was stronger, and it's kind of like a liminal time. Also, Halloween is another one of those times, and like the veil between the spiritual world and the physical reality is a little bit less so, and spirits are kind of roaming the dark earth, and it's also just cold. Yule was a feast starting with the winter solstice, and there's a lot of symbolism there because it's like at the time when the sun is at weakest point. And Yule, the etymology of Yule, it came from Odin originally. So one thing that they would do is have this tradition of the Yule log, and what they would do is these Germanic pagans, they would find a gigantic log, and they would burn it for 12 days. That's where kind of the 12 days of Christmas kind of comes from as well. And they would ignite it for the duration of the festival. There would be songs, stories told, dancing, decorations would be hung on the log, but also it's also kind of like a refuge against like the cold, dark kind of the dark woods. You don't want to go out there because spirits are kind of roaming around during this time of the year. So the log would ward off these evil spirits, and it also kind of represented the death and resurrection of the sun, culminating in the winter solstice. So the winter solstice would happen, and then the log is kind of like celebrating the days are getting longer each day, and that's kind of symbolic. There's this concept of the holly king versus the oak king. So holly is kind of representing the waning year, and holly, it's deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la. Holly represented fertility. It fended off natural disasters and ward off evil spirits from the house. And holly would be considered more masculine, in contrast to there's another plant that was more feminine, and is considered more masculine because it had spiky leaves. And there's this story of the holly king and the oak king. So the holly king represents the waning of the year as the days are getting shorter, and then the oak king represents the waxing of the year. So the sun, so the winter solstice is actually the turning point between the battle between the holly king and the oak king, and the oak king starts to get the upper hand during this time. The holly king is at strongest during the winter solstice, but it's just kind of like the tides are turning, and then obviously during the summer solstice, the oak king is at its strongest, and the holly king starts to turn the tides after the summer solstice. So there's kind of the symbolism of the sun at its lowest point, and the Catholics, they repurpose this imagery to represent the Christ and the Son of God. Specifically with holly, the prickly leaves, they repurpose holly to represent the passion of the Christ, with the prickly leaves representing the crown of thorns, and holly has white berries that turn red, so that represents the shedding of Christ's blood. And also, like, the symbolism of Christ when it comes to the Yule log is Christ is associated with the sun. As the sun begins to rise, it's like Christ has entered into the world, the savior of mankind. So there's kind of an easy connection there between the pagan ideas and the Catholic understanding of things. So next, Christmas ham and New Year's resolutions. So you've probably seen The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and they have the roast beast. It's clearly like a giant roasted pig, And there is kind of this that came from pagan times, because during Yule they would take what's known as a sonargalter, or a giant boar, and they would take the boar before the king. The boar's still alive, and people would make solemn and serious vows, and they place their hand on the pig before the king, and they would make these solemn and serious vows because the god Freyr is associated with fertility, farming, and boars. And it was thought that when you spoke these vows to the boar, it would go straight to the god Freyr, and you're hoping for Freyr to bless you in the coming year, the god of agriculture, and you're hoping that by making these solemn vows that Freyr would bless you with a bountiful harvest in the coming year. So what they would do after everyone makes the vows is they would sacrifice it, and they would consume its flesh, and then they would sprinkle the blood on the walls. And by making the sacrifice and upholding these oaths, it was believed that Freyr would bless the coming year with prosperity and fertility. But they would also enforce the punishment if someone like made these public vows but then kind of just didn't uphold them. Then the king might actually punish, not always, but might punish this person. So that is actually the origin of New Year's resolutions during that time of the year. And the tradition of the Christmas hymn would continue, and it became associated with St. Stephen. His feast day is December 26th, and he's the first martyr. And for whatever reason, Christmas ham is now associated with St. Stephen. And the Nordics, when they invade England, they brought the lore of the pigs and their love of pigs to England. And Oxford University and other places, they have the Boar's Head Festival every year. And it's been going at Oxford since 1340. And there's kind of Christian symbolism to it now as well. The triumph over this ferocious beast, the boar, is like now associated with Christ and his triumph over sin. So next, mistletoe. Why do we kiss underneath the mistletoe? Well, mistletoe is a semi-parasitic plant, so it doesn't grow in the ground. It grows on other trees, and it spreads through bird poop, and it leaches minerals and resources from the host tree. They often remain green during the winter time, even after all the leaves of all the other trees have fallen off, and they also spread from tree to tree from bird poop, so they never really touch the ground so much. So in the Norse pagan mythology, Freya, she's the goddess of fertility and love, the equivalent of Aphrodite, I believe. I'm not sure if she's associated with Hera at all, but she had a son, Balder, and she loved her son so much, and she made a deal with creation that no person, animal, or inanimate object would be able to harm her son. And she overlooks mistletoe for some reason. But Loki, the trickster god, figures out about this, and he crafts some arrows out of mistletoe branches, and he tricks Balder's blind brother Hodor to shoot those arrows, and the arrows pierce Balder and kill him. So Freya is devastated, and she is very distraught. The other gods agree to bring Balder back from the dead, and Freya's sorrowful tears turn into joyful tears, and they become the white berries of the mistletoe. And so because Freya's love and joyfulness is now associated with the mistletoe instead of hatred of mistletoe, and so because of this, those who pass under its branches must show a sign of affection in a kiss. There's also kind of a connection to Yggdrasil, which is like the Nordic world tree. They believe that reality is tree-like in structure, and that trees, there's the 9 realms, and the gods lived in Asgard or Vanaheim in the higher realms. So because mistletoe is not rooted into the ground, it's up in the higher branches. Mistletoe has a connection to kind of divine and heavenly and the gods and the realm of the gods. So the Druids were aware of this, and they revered mistletoe as a divine plant. They would take a golden sickle and cut the mistletoe like very reverently from the trees, and catching a sheet. I'm not sure exactly what they would use the mistletoe for exactly, but the Druids. So yeah, that's kind of the symbolism and the history behind mistletoe. And I think that the theme of love conquering death translates from the Freya Baldur story to the Christ story very nicely. So next, Christmas elves. Where did they come from? So they were called Nisa in the Scandinavian countries, house elves or Tonta, and the Norse pagans, they believe them to be house spirits. They could be either helpful or mischievous depending on how you dealt with them. The tradition, and there was kind of a tradition to leave a bowl of porridge out for them to appease them. But there's a fine line, because you can either be too far, too giving too generous or not enough. And if you're too generous, then you might get taken advantage of. It's kind of like the book, if you give a mouse a cookie. But if you are if you don't give anything at all, then you will also be punished or pranked. So if you've kind of hit that golden mean, then sometimes the Nisa will help you out too. They might do some household chores. They might also, there's apparently they will braid the hair of horses. And if you see that, if you just come out one morning and all your horse's hair is braided, it's recommended to not undo those braids, because you might anger the spirit. So the Catholics, when they came, they viewed oftentimes the spirits as either neutral or demonic in nature. There is a recent video by 𝚲𝚑𝚛𝚒, and he talks about fairies, and he talks about how there is a tradition among like the Celts, how that the fairies are there were the neutral angels. Some of them are malicious, but in the battle in heaven, some of the angels side with Lucifer and some of them side with God. But there was also some that were kind of neutral and didn't. And that this kind of is similar to how jinns in the Islamic or Arabic mythology, some of them are kind of neutral as well. So maybe that would explain some of the fairies, how not all of them are purely evil, but in general, many of them are viewed as demonic. And Beowulf and Shakespeare's Midsummer's Night Dream elves and fairies are considered to be more evil, whereas Tolkien has a different view of it, and they're kind of like a different class of beings. So maybe it's possible that there is a different class of spiritual entities that we just don't know about, or angels. But yeah, I've been thinking about like what's the deal with fairies for a while. So next, Yule goat. So this is more of a Scandinavia specific tradition, but there was a tradition of creating a straw Yule goat as an ornament on their trees. Or I don't know exactly when they started doing the ornamentation, but the origins are kind of unclear, and there's a popular theory that it has to do with Thor, because according to mythology, Thor would fly through the sky in his chariot, and his goats, they're called Tanngrisnir and Tannnoster, and they would fly through the air, pulling Thor in his chariot through the sky. And every year during Yule, Thor would kill and eat these goats, but then he would resurrect them during the winter solstice. So that may be the origin of the Yule goat. There is the goat ornaments, like a thing in Sweden, and there is the Swedish Gavle goats, which since 1966, on the first day of Advent, a giant Yule, it's like a giant, I'll try and post a picture in this video, a giant straw like Yule goat is constructed in Slottstorget, which is the castle square, and for some reason it's been like vandalized, and there's a tradition of burning down the goat, and it's never like sanctioned, but people just come and like burn down the goat, and it's happened like close to 40 times now since 1966, and it's kind of a tradition now to burn down the goat. Like it's constructed, and then someone sneaks in and burns it down. Yule bucking, there is also a tradition of going door to door wearing a mask, and your neighbors would try to identify who you are wearing a mask. And I'm not sure exactly why this happens. I didn't do a huge amount of research into it. Krampus. So the pagan origins of Krampus are a little unclear. Some think that Krampus was the grandson of Loki, or the daughter of Hel, who's the god of the underworld. There's kind of this dichotomy of naughty and nice children who Krampus would punish the naughty children by either kidnapping them or beating them with birch branches. So that Krampus was a pagan figure for sure, but as the Catholics kind of came along, he became associated with Satan and the demonic. And as the Saint Nicholas tradition spread, you start seeing all these artworks of Saint Nicholas and Krampus together, and Protestants will see that and they'll be like, oh, the Catholics are clearly demonic because look at this demon, look at Saint Nicholas with this demon. But what would happen was there's this understanding that Saint Nicholas had power over Krampus, and so he would often have Krampus bound in chains, and he'd be controlling him because he's a bishop and he has apostolic authority and power over Krampus. So on the feast day of Saint Nicholas, on December 6th, there would be kind of a reenactment of this whole situation where Saint Nicholas kind of tames Krampus, and that's kind of the origin of Krampusnacht, or it's actually December 5th. And so that's where Krampusnacht came from. Saint Nicholas taming the devil, essentially, and having power over this demon. The Christian religion is more powerful than the demons. So they're able to incorporate Krampus into this Christian worldview. And unfortunately now, today, Krampusnacht is gaining in popularity, but now they've began to remove St. Nicholas. Before, St. Nicholas would have him on a chain, but now Krampus is just kind of doing his own thing, and now that's the only thing that's left, is Krampus will go around scaring children. People will give Krampus shots of alcohol, and so sometimes he might be a little drunk, and that happens on December 5th, which is the feast day of St. Nicholas. So it's kind of weird how that develops, but I guess originally there was the pagan god, and then St. Nicholas came in, but as Christianity's declined, now it's just the pagan god again. So the Christmas tree, the pagans, so actually the winter tree tradition it's not local to Europe. It's the Egyptians had some form of it, the Iranians, the Romans did, and it has to do with the sun god and the death of the sun god on the winter solstice. So bringing in a green tree into your house is to signify, because you have a green plant in the middle of the winter and it's alive, it's beautiful, it represents life in the midst of the darkest time. And so it's kind of a hopeful symbol where they would bring in a tree into their house, and it represent kind of hope for the revival of the sun god. So, but where so Saint Boniface, he is the apostle of Germany. He converted many of the Germans during the 8th century. He was an Anglo-Saxon monk sent to convert these German tribes in the Frankish Empire. And the famous kind of Catholic association comes from this. He was traveling along, and he finally comes to Hesse, Germany, and the pagans are there, and there's this giant oak tree that is dedicated to Thor in the center of the village, and they're about to do a child sacrifice, and they're about to sacrifice this child to Thor. And with great zeal, Saint Boniface, he grabs an axe, and he walks up to the tree and starts chopping the tree. And the pagans didn't stop him because they literally thought he was going to be struck down by Thor. This just shows how pagans truly did believe that the pagan gods were real, and that the pagan gods would actually do something. So they were shocked that he was able to chop the tree, and he chops the tree all the way down. And that shows that the Christian God is stronger than Thor. So, and then he replaces the oak tree with an evergreen tree, and he calls it Christ tree. And so the Christmas tree, according to Catholics, represents the Trinity, because it's the triangle shape of it, and it points towards heaven. So by the 12th century, it became common. Catholics would hang an evergreen branch in their house upside down to represent the Trinity. So the Christmas tree represents the Trinity. the Christmas tree kind of became more popularized by German Protestants as well. And in 1848, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were depicted in a graphic with a giant Christmas tree. That popularized it even more. The Christmas tree tradition was brought to America by various German and Dutch immigrants. New York was originally controlled by the Dutch, so they brought their German traditions with them. And the Christmas tree was further popularized because the electric lobby was trying to popularize lights and electricity. And so what they did is in the 19th century, they put up a giant 60-foot Christmas tree covered in Christmas lights. And that really made big waves in popularizing the Christmas tree. And in 1931 was the first time like the White House had a Christmas tree, and it was put up by the Rockefeller Center. There's the synthetic trees. They were invented when polyvinyl was invented, and those are pretty common, pretty popular. I have mixed feelings on it. I've grew up with a artificial tree, but I had a real Christmas tree for the first time like last year, and I can see the pros and cons. It's kind of dangerous, having a dead tree with electric lights on it. It can start a fire. It's kind of an effort to get a Christmas tree, but I don't know. There's something about it that's really nice. It smells really nice. So, yeah, Christmas trees represents the Trinity. I know some Protestants will quote, "Oh, Christmas trees are pagan," because it says in one of the books of the Old Testament you shouldn't bring in a tree, but that's kind of missing the point. Next, Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is multifaceted. There's kind of a modern Santa is a blend of three different kind of things. So there is some Norse pagan influence. There's similarities to Odin. So there's pagan influence, there's Catholic influence, and then there's kind of modern capitalistic branding influence. So we'll start with the pagan. So during Yule, the head god Odin would lead a ghostly spectral hunt through the wintry night sky. And this would happen during the Yule time. Odin would ride his 8-legged horse Sleipnir and would be accompanied by others like Thor, elves, dwarves, and other creatures hunting prey or fighting the frost giants through the night sky. He would also punish evildoers by sending them to the underworld or Helheim, and he would I don't know if he would reward people. I think he did. And pagans would kind of hunker down inside by the Yule log, trying to keep warm and staying away from the wrath of Odin, especially if you're an evildoer. So, this spectral, maybe you would see a demonic kind of spectral hunt through the skies at night back then. You never know. But Odin's horse has 8 legs, and Santa Claus originally had 8 reindeer. With they add the last 2 reindeer later in the second rendition, but Clement Clarke Moore in his 1822 poem had the original 8 reindeer. So, yeah, Santa is definitely influenced by Odin to some degree. So, the Catholic tradition, so Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, that's what it means. Saint Nicholas. And who was Saint Nicholas? He was a Turkish. He lived in Turkey, and he was an ethnic Greek bishop of Myra in Asia Minor or modern Turkey. He lived from 270 to 343. He was known as Saint Nicholas the Wonder Worker, and he is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, children, brewers, pawnbrokers, unmarried people, and students. So the reason why he was associated with giving gifts is because there is the story of one day Nicholas overheard this poor man. He had 3 daughters, and they didn't have money for a dowry, and he was considering sending them into some of them into a life of prostitution because he literally could not afford it. And so he heard about this, and Saint Nicholas, at night he came by the house, and he would anonymously slip these bags of coins through the window. at night, and then he would disappear, and he kept doing this. And eventually the father caught him and found him, and he realized who he was, but St. Nicholas didn't want any recognition. He didn't want anyone to know about it. He would anonymously give gifts. That's why he's associated with giving presents. And he also, there's a story where he saved some falsely accused guys from being executed. There's 3 innocent men, according to Michael the Archimandrite, who were condemned to death by the governor 𝚑𝚘𝚛. As they were about to get executed, Nicholas appeared, and he pushed the executioner's sword to the ground, released the prisoners from their chains, and angrily chastised the juror and the executioner who had accepted a bribe. So Nicholas also is said to have visited the Holy Land, the reason why he's the patron of sailors. And a ship nearby was in a big storm, and they were being tossed about. And St. Nicholas apparently appeared on board the ship, and he chastises the sea, and he rebukes the waves, and that kind of calms the sea. And then he kind of disappears, and the sailors keep going. And when they arrive in the port, St. Nicholas is there. He's not even on the ship anymore. So he kind of like teleported onto the ship. There's also the reason why he's the patron saint of children is because he saved some children from being pickled. They were going to be cannibalized during a famine, and he stopped that and saved the children. So he was also at the Council of Nicaea, and there was the heresy of Arianism during the time, and which swept through the church in the 300s and 400s, and Arianism almost took over the whole church. It was over the divinity of Christ and the Trinity. And the heresiarch, or Arius, was there, and St. Nicholas was there, and he either slapped or punched Arius in the face at this council. After the council, Arianism kind of was finally defeated. It lasted for a bit longer, but so yeah, he slapped the heretic. Regarding Santa Claus, the modern kind of capitalistic why we have this mythos of Santa Claus is there's the tradition of Santa Claus. So Santa Claus came from the German and the Dutch immigrants originally, but there's the Dutch actually would celebrate Sinterklaas. They call him Sinterklaas and they celebrate his feast on December 6th, not December 25th. So the main influence of the modern perception of Santa Claus is the poem "The Night Before Christmas" by Clement Clarke Moore in 1823. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was written by Robert Louis May in 1939, and that also largely influenced the modern conception of Santa. And then Coca-Cola was a major driving force, and they really cemented Santa as they had some illustrations by Haddon Sundblom in 1931. And during this time, corporations really realized that, and they really embraced Christmas as a time for commercial sales. So the corporations really embraced Santa Claus. The department stores started having the real-life Santa Clauses. The Salvation Army started having the Santa Clauses ringing the bells. And today, now, Christmas is just kind of like a bastardization of what it once was. All that's left now is kind of, the commercialization of things with Christmas. But yeah, so Santa Claus is an amalgamation of those different forces. And it's I don't know, Santa Claus is a good thing, I think. Christmas is kind of one of those things where it's a hedge, it's a remnant, it's one of those things that remains, even though we live in more or less an increasingly secularized society. So it's a good thing that Christmas is still acknowledged and revered, but there probably will come a day where Christmas is just like attacked, and people will try to do away with Christmas more. It's hard to do away with Christmas, but I can see that happening more in the future. So yes, a lot of the Christmas traditions have a lot of influence from European Germanic paganism, but that doesn't mean that it means the same thing to those who celebrate that as it did to the pagans. So the Christmas traditions, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Christmas is its own thing. It's not really exactly derived from things. It just borrowed things, and that's just how things are. That's how things were in the past. You just borrow from things that are already there. When Christians came and were trying to convert the pagans, they weren't going to just like destroy every single thing and build from like a sola scriptura thing. I mean, the Bible wasn't even compiled until the 300s or 400s, so there was no kind of Protestant ethos understanding of, oh, we have to only have this like things from the Bible. And these traditions are good. I think they're morally good. They add cohesiveness to our culture. There might be a lot of reality to some of these ancient pagan things. We don't know what these people were seeing back then. I don't think they were just like making up stuff arbitrarily. They probably were seeing like house spirits and that kind of thing. Maybe Odin really was flying across the sky. What I do see is a big push for neo-paganism across all cultures. I saw in Bollywood. In some of the Bollywood movies, they're trying to like popularize kind of like the old pagan ways. All this Viking kind of, they got Black Vikings on Netflix, and all this Viking stuff is trying to like glamorize paganism from the past. You see it in the Mexican culture too. They're trying to glamorize Mexican paganism. So there's a big push to bring back paganism. It's coming back. It needs to be kind of understood better for Catholics and for defense of the faith against both the pagans and the Protestants. And it's been passed down to us. I think it's a good thing. And the reason why it matters to know like the history and the lore is because I don't know, it also just enriches your life when we see Christmas, to know the symbols of like, oh, okay, we have holly on our Advent wreath, and it's like, oh, that represents the Passion of the Christ and that kind of thing. So I hope you guys are having a joyful Christmas season. I hope you guys took away stuff. Please subscribe to me. I'm almost to 100 subscribers. I'd like to get to 100 subscribers. That's the goal. I hope you guys like this kind of content. I like this kind of lore stuff. That's one of my strengths, I think. So I like history. I like that kind of stuff. So if you want more lore, then hit that subscribe button. I got plans for 2023. There's things in the work, and I'm hoping to grow this channel over time. Eventually, I'm going to start posting on like other platforms too, like PeerTube and Odyssey. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a Merry Christmas. We got like a weird kind of 2-month chunk of time before Lent. So I've been thinking about like what to do in this weird 2-month chunk of time. So I'm thinking about starting the Small Junior bench press program, because I've been plateauing on bench pretty hard lately. So I want to increase my bench press. I've been really sick, so I haven't worked out for like 8 or 9 days. Nothing like super intense. So I'm hoping to make some gains before Lent, and then start cutting and fasting a lot during Lent. That's what I'm thinking about. And probably in my next video, I want to do a video on strengths finders. So I'll see you guys in the next one.